Welcome to the Deep Dive, ready to go deep. Today we're taking a look at what makes organizations tick, like why would a company team up with a rival, or why do small businesses sometimes struggle to stay independent?
It's a great question, and that's where resource dependence theory, RDT, comes in.
RDT. Okay, so break that down for us.
In a nutshell, it says that organizations, big or small, aren't isolated. They depend on resources from their surroundings.
So not just what's going on within the company walls, but their connections and dependencies on the outside.
Precisely. Things like funding, raw materials, skilled workers, technology, even public approval, they all play a part.
Makes sense. Everything's connected.
Exactly. And what makes RDT so insightful is that these dependencies create power dynamics.
Power dynamics. Okay, now it's getting interesting.
It is. The more an organization needs a particular resource, and the fewer the alternatives they have, the more power the resource provider holds.
It's kind of like a chess match, right? Everyone's trying to maneuver for the best position, control those key resources.
Great analogy. And this power dynamic can play out in so many ways. Think of a startup that's relying on venture capital to get going.
Ah, I see. They'd be under a lot of pressure to keep those investors happy.
Exactly. Their dependence on that funding could lead them to make decisions they wouldn't otherwise make.
Even if it means straying from their original goals.
Sometimes, yes. And that's where RDT gets even more fascinating. It suggests that organizations are always trying to juggle these dependencies.
Trying to reduce their vulnerability.
Precisely. That's why you see so much research around mergers, acquisitions, strategic alliances, even lobbying.
They're all trying to secure those vital resources.
Absolutely. And manage those relationships. It's all connected.
Sounds like RDT gives us a framework to understand all these complex moves.
Exactly. It helps explain why organizations do what they do.
Okay, so let's dive into some real-world examples. Where should we start?
Well, one of the classic cases is the relationship between car manufacturers and their suppliers.
Ah, right. The car makers need the tires. The tire makers need someone to put them on.
That's it. They're locked in a sort of interdependent bands.
And that impacts how they act towards each other.
For sure. Car manufacturers might think twice before pushing their suppliers too hard.
Because ultimately they need each other to succeed.
Exactly. It's a balancing act. Secure the best deal, but also keep the whole supply chain healthy.
Fascinating. And this applies beyond just manufacturing, right?
Oh, absolutely. RDT helps explain so much, from why companies form joint ventures to why nonprofits might adjust their programs to fit their funders' goals.
So it's not just about profit, it's about understanding how all kinds of organizations navigate this web of dependence.
Precisely. It's a universal principle of organizational life.
Okay, so if dependencies can make you vulnerable, wouldn't organizations want to break free completely? Become self-sufficient?
You'd think so, but that's where it gets really interesting. Complete self-sufficiency, especially now, is often just not possible.
Yeah, I guess in today's world, everything's so specialized.
Exactly. Think about all the parts that go into a smartphone. No one company could make them all.
So even the biggest players rely on a whole network.
It's like an ecosystem where each part plays a crucial role.
Makes you realize how interconnected everything is.
It does. So managing these dependencies becomes key.
Not about eliminating them, but mitigating the risks and maximizing what you can gain from them.
That's the idea.
It's giving me a whole new perspective on how organizations work.
And that's the power of RDP. It helps us decode those often subtle forces that shape organizational behavior.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork. What's next?
Now let's get into some of the research. It dives into how organizations manage these dependencies in specific ways.
I'm all ears. This is already fascinating.
Good, there's a lot more to uncover. One way organizations try to get a handle on their resources is through mergers and acquisitions.
Right, bringing your supplier in-house.
Exactly. Less uncertainty, more control over the supply chain.
Makes sense, but I imagine that comes with its own headaches.
Of course, merging two companies isn't a walk in the park, and RET research digs into that.
How so?
Well, research by Casciaro and Piskorski found that mergers are actually less likely when there's a big power imbalance between the organizations.
Hold on, I would have thought the more powerful one would just swallow up the smaller one.
It seems intuitive, but put yourself in the shoes of the stronger organization.
Okay.
They already have the upper hand. Why bother with the mess of a full-blown merger?
They'd rather just keep things as they are.
Keep the dependent organization at arm's length.
So they benefit, but don't want the hassle of fully integrating them.
Right, a kind of strategic distance.
And the research backs that up.
Yeah, they looked at U.S. companies from 1985 to 2000.
Quite a while.
And they found that when two organizations were already deeply intertwined, Any power imbalance actually made mergers less likely.
So, too much friction for things to work smoothly.
Exactly, those pre-existing dynamics get in the way.
Fascinating stuff. Makes me look at mergers in a whole new light.
That's what RDP does. It challenges assumptions.
So if mergers aren't always the answer, what else do organizations do?
Well, there's a whole range of options. Strategic alliances, joint ventures, those are common.
Teaming up instead of merging.
Right. Collaborate on a project, pool resources, that sort of thing.
Definitely less messy than a full-on merger.
Often, yeah. Imagine two pharmaceutical companies working on a new drug.
Okay, I'm following.
They might form a joint venture to share the costs, share the risks.
And leverage each other's strengths.
Exactly. Get the benefits without the merger headaches.
And alliances can even help smaller players compete, right?
Absolutely. Two smaller companies can join forces.
Take on the big guys.
The David and Goliath scenario, RDT, helps explain how those dynamics play out.
Makes you think differently about competition. It's not just about battling it out.
It's also about recognizing when collaboration makes sense, when interdependence is key.
A whole new way of looking at the business world.
RDT helps us see those connections, those webs of relationships.
And it's not just business. It applies to nonprofits, too.
Of course, any organization. Imagine a nonprofit relying on a single government grant.
Oh, they'd be walking on eggshells.
Likely, they might have to adapt their programs, their mission even.
To please the funding agency.
Keep the money flowing. It's a reality for many organizations.
So even those doing good are influenced by these dependencies.
We're all part of the system. Those dependencies shape our choices, even with the best intentions.
A bit sobering when you put it like that.
It is, but remember, RDT doesn't say organizations are helpless.
They still have some control.
They have agency. They can make choices to manage those dependencies.
So it's not deterministic. It's more like a roadmap.
A framework for understanding the forces at play, the options organizations have.
Got it. And one of the most interesting things about RDT is its focus on legitimacy.
Legitimacy.
Being seen as trustworthy, credible.
I see what you mean.
A company with a bad reputation is going to have a harder time.
Attracting customers, securing funding, absolutely.
And RDT suggests you can use relationships to boost your legitimacy.
Right, like a young company partnering with a well-established one.
Borrow some of that good standing.
Exactly. Or a company that's been criticized for its labor practices might work with a union.
To show they're serious about change.
Building trust, building that social safety net.
Really smart strategy.
It can have real benefits. Studies show companies with higher legitimacy do better financially, less scrutiny from regulators.
Legitimacy as a kind of currency.
You got it. And speaking of currency, there's another area of RDT research that looks at the economic side of managing these dependencies.
The financial implications.
Right. Remember those mergers and acquisitions we talked about? Well, researchers have been looking at how antitrust laws influence those decisions.
Antitrust laws, those are all about preventing monopolies.
Right, exactly. Promoting competition. So how do they fit into the RDT picture?
Good question. Seems like they might clash with the whole idea of organizations trying to control their resources.
That tension is there, the individual company versus the good of the market.
A balancing act, for sure.
And researchers have been studying this to understand how antitrust laws shape behavior. Are they really effective?
Fascinating stuff.
It is, with some surprising findings, too. So we were talking about antitrust laws, how they might clash with organizations wanting to manage their dependencies.
Yeah, that push and pull between what a company wants and what's good for the market as a whole.
Exactly. And there's this study by Dries and Huygens that really sheds light on that.
Okay, what do they look at?
They looked at how the 1992 horizontal merger guidelines in the U.S. impacted organizations.
Horizontal merger guidelines. What are those exactly?
Basically, they made it harder for companies in the same industry to merge.
To prevent monopolies.
That was the idea, keep competition strong.
So two big tech companies wanting to merge would face more scrutiny.
Exactly. They'd have to prove it wouldn't hurt competition or consumers.
Makes sense. So what happened? Did companies just give up on mergers?
That's where it gets interesting. Dries and Huygens found that companies did change their strategies.
But they didn't stop trying to manage those dependencies.
No, they got more creative. The study found that instead of risky mergers, companies started forming more alliances and joint ventures.
So they found workarounds.
They did. They could still access resources, reduce uncertainty, but without triggering the same level of antitrust scrutiny.
So achieving similar goals, but through different means.
Exactly. Shows how adaptable organizations can be. That drive to manage dependencies is strong.
But they're willing to play the game, adapt to the rules.
That's the takeaway here, and there's another interesting finding from this research.
Well, what's that?
They found that stricter antitrust enforcement actually hurt the profitability of the mergers that did happen after those 1992 guidelines.
Wait, so the mergers that were allowed actually did worse?
It seems counterintuitive, but think about it. The mergers that got approved were probably the ones that posed the least threat to competition.
The ones that wouldn't really shake things up.
Exactly. So maybe the most profitable mergers, the ones that would really change the market, those got blocked.
So regulations might have worked too well in a way?
It's possible to suggest that while preventing monopolies is important, we also have to consider the potential downsides of those regulations.
Makes you think about the balance between protecting competition and allowing for innovation.
Absolutely, and I think this is where RDT is so valuable. It helps us untangle all these complex factors that shape how organizations behave.
It's not just about the drive to secure resources. It's about the legal landscape, the regulations, everything plays a part.
Exactly, it's a multifaceted picture.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into resource dependence theory. Any final thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think the key takeaway is that RDT gives us this powerful tool to understand why organizations do what they do. It goes beyond simple explanations and shows how those resource dependencies are at the heart of so many strategic decisions.
They're like seeing behind the curtain, understanding those motivations.
Exactly, and this understanding is valuable for anyone who deals with organizations, employees, investors, policymakers, even just everyday people.
Because we're all affected by how organizations behave.
We are. And as the world becomes more interconnected, resources become scarcer, the principles of RDT are only going to become more relevant.
It's a framework that can help us navigate the complexities of the modern world.
Help us make better decisions about the organizations we interact with.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into resource dependence theory. We hope you've enjoyed exploring this fascinating world with us.
Yeah, just scratch the surface. There's so much more to discover.
And we encourage you to keep learning, keep asking questions, and join us again next time for another deep dive